we're SOA software, and Mads is going to talk about securing APIs and putting policies on APIs. But I'm just going to give a very short introduction to the company. We have existed for 15 years. We're US based, but Mads is from Copenhagen, and so am I. So we have a Nordic presence, and we have quite a few customers in the Nordic region. So the way we see the market, and we haven't been doing API management for 15 years. I don't think anybody has. Well, that depends on how you define it, of course. But we have been doing mainly SOA governance. And there's a timer on this. Great. So this is where we come from. This is how we see the world today. The two boxes in the bottom is where we come from. That's SOA governance. And the bottom one is what we traditionally call design time governance. The top one is what we traditionally call runtime governance or operational governance. So that's what we have been doing for 15 years. Now, according to us and Gartner, the worlds of SOA and API management are in a convergence. So we like that. And 2 years ago, we built on top of our governance solutions an API management solution using our existing software. And you saw the demo of if you did see the demo, you saw the demo of the community manager working on top of our runtime management solution or our integrated gateway. I like this from Gartner, the latest Magic Quadrant on application services governance. I especially like the last sentence there. An API, strictly speaking, is defined as an access method to an existing service or a service interface. I like that. It's especially since we're coming from SOA and moving up to API management. That's really something that we agree on. Last slide for me. The introduction slide. This is where we are in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, just released. And you can see quite a bit of the other attendees or the other sponsors at this conference is in the same space. So I guess we're at the right place. Without further ado, I'll hand over I'll actually turn this microphone off because he has the cool looking headset. So this is Mads, take it away.
Yeah, hello. I would like to talk about the key components to build a solid foundation for exposing your APIs. And as Peter mentioned, our background is that it's in SOA, so our view is very often that you have some existing services built with whatever technology you have. Typically, it's SOAP and HTTP, and you want to expose it as an API to the mobile devices or the web pages. And in that world, people don't like the SOAP. They will like REST, they will like JSON, a bit more lightweight. But we still have to add the security without making it too heavy. So I would like to talk about first some OAuth and about why OAuth is important and what it will do for your business and for your success of your APIs. Then I will talk about licensing. It's about how you describe and communicate your business model. And the next will be quota management, and that's how you enable your business model. So after you describe it, how you will enable it. And of course, protection, the good old discipline, but don't forget it when you start exposing your APIs, still important. Then I will talk about role of policies. What role does policy play in API security? And then I will end up speaking about security mediation based on the roles. So OAuth, why is OAuth a good component into the API security? And what does it solve? If you look at an API and look at when will an API get a big success, the two key thing in our opinion is that it's the speed of app development and the speed of app adoption. And by app development, I mean how easy accessible are your API? When a developer goes on the internet and finds your company and finds your APIs, how easy is it for him to get started on the APIs? I also mentioned yesterday one of the keynotes, you don't want it to make too hard to start and he gets like an email and it'll go 2 days before he gets something, and then you want it to be very accessible so you get more apps and more iteration and more collaboration with your API. That's a good start, but if you have a lot of apps, it's also important that the end user, the mobile user, is using those apps. So the whole app adoption. And to get a big app adoption, you need trust, because you want your end user to trust what you have. And those two problems is solved by OAuth, because OAuth is taking the complexity out of the app developing, or the API developing. So when you have an API that uses OAuth, the app developer who is using that doesn't have to worry about the whole security and credential and the trust to the guy who exposed the API, like how he's storing these credentials. All that is handled by a trusted OAuth provider. And the same with the app adoption for the end user point of view. The end user have to trust an OAuth provider and doesn't need to trust the app developer. And he knows when it's OAuth that he can see what is he giving permission to, and it's easy for him to opt out of it again. He say, I don't want to use my credentials here anymore. It's easy to cancel that trust. So OAuth is a good match for API, the way we see it. Licensing, as I mentioned before, that's how you describe your business model. And it's about like, how do I manage your API? How do I take an API and provide it under different licensing? So let's say you have an API and you want to provide it under different models. You want to provide it as a gold, silver, and bronze, depending on if people are paying for it. It's a free API. And you want to be able to communicate that. So when a developer go in and make a contract to you, you want to be able to make it visible for him, like, okay, I'm taking an active decision that I want to go for the free version, even though they have these limitations of throughput or concurrent calls. Or you might even control that the free guy only get some documentation, where the paid user get full documentation, they get code examples, and they get much more knowledge. So you want to be able to describe that and make it visible for the app developer, so it's an active choice he's making. And licensing leads me to code management, but the step in between is the flow, of course. So when an app invokes an API, there's a natural flow. The first step is the authentication of the app. So it's the application that's authenticated to the API, not the end user. So you're authenticating, and that could be OAuth, as I mentioned before. It could be some app ID, or it could be something in the header, or even in the body of the call. And based on that authentication, you determine what contract or what license have that app chosen. And then based on what license it is, you enforce different quality of service. So you enforce that they can max call 10 times a minute, or 2 concurrent calls. So as I said, the licensing was about how you describe it to the end user or to the consumer, where quota management is then how to enforce the policies, how to enforce your business model. So it's about enforcing that you minimize the throughput, to say, okay, you only paid for this amount of throughput, or this bandwidth, or this concurrency. But of course, it could also be the opposite, that you guarantee something, that you have a partner and you guarantee that he will have a response in max 10 milliseconds, or that he always can call you 24/7. So it's you want your API platform to enforce those policies that you have described in your business model. And that's very useful. It doesn't matter how you use your APIs or who you provide it to, because sometimes you provide your APIs to the public, or it could be to a partner, or it could even be internally in an organization. If it's public, it's very often about you want to limit so they don't make so many invocations that your internal user doesn't get any throughput. But if it's a partner, you probably don't want to limit it. You don't want to limit that you can only sell so much of your products. It's typically more about you want to guarantee him something, like the response time or concurrent invocations. And internally, it could be used for forcing people to think about how they use your API. So if you have another department or somebody else who's using API, if you have a contract, a licensing, and you enforce it on runtime, you make the consuming application or web page think about how they use your API. So they don't just call, they maybe think about, oh, maybe I should cache this or not call it now. So it's useful in all three situations. And of course, the next step is what do you do when they break a quota, if they use it more than you want to use? There's, of course, two things. You can either just cut the line, or you can do as a lot of cell phone provider does. If you have a prepaid phone card, you have 10,000 minutes, and when you use your minutes, the typical don't cut the line, they just charge you a lot for the next minute. So you pick between those two paradigms, and of course that depends on your business model, what fits your company best. So we talked about security with the OAuth, we talked about licensing and how you enforce it with the quota management, and then you have this classic old discipline of protection, and it's still valid. You have to protect your APIs against denial of service, injection attacks, cross-site scripting, and of course viruses. And shouldn't forget about that. So it is important that your API platform can handle those things too. So it's not just a XML gateway that send it straight to your backend system. So you want to protect yourself, because at the end of the day, your API is your reputation. So if your API doesn't perform, or it's down, or it get hacked, it's your business reputation that's on the line. Yeah. I mentioned the word policy, and we also did that at Dame. That's a key word in our world. And if you look it up in Wikipedia, you get this definition, the first line of the organization's objectives and guidelines for how to achieve those objectives. And, well, what does that mean? That means that you want to make the people who know something about it make the definition. So if you have a security policy, you want to have your security department make that definition, because they're the one who is on the line, they're the one who have the responsibility for the security. So you don't want to leave that to the developer, the API developer, to describe how secure this API should be. So you want your policies, your security policy, and all the other policies to have their own life. It's not something you just code when you make an API. It's something you describe and say, okay, I have this security policy when I have an external API. You define it by your security team, and then you apply it to your services or your APIs where it's useful. And what's actually most interesting about policy is not so much how you write them, but more how you apply them. Because a lot of vendors, they have support for policies. But it's more a drag and drop, and you then define the policy inside the API. So suddenly you mix your business logic and your process logic with your policies. We believe that those things should be totally separated, and the way you apply it should be by inheritance. So it's the content and the semantics of your API that defines which policy has to be applied. So if you have a policy or an API that have sensitive data, then you will always apply these policies. Or if you have an API that is provided to a B2B, then it's these policy. Or if it's a public one, then it's these policies. So it's controlled, and it's not just up to your great developer to remember to apply something or pick the right ones. And by having them defined in their own way and being applied, you also remove a lot of complexity. So it's easier for the developer. The developer doesn't have to worry about all those complex things about, oh, how is an OAuth token and what do I do with it? They have to concentrate about making business logic, where they add value. And you also only have one place to maintain it. So if something changes, you change policies or security policies, you change it one place and it will be applied to all the places. And of course, that will help you prevent making false. So policy is very important to be successful with your API and minimize your workload. And because if you have all those policy defined, then you can start making policy-based mediation, because then your API platform knows about them. It's just not something that's just hidden down in the code. So your platform can say, okay, I have this internal service. It's a classic SOAP service, and it uses web service security and maybe a SAML token, but I want to expose it to the big world using REST and JSON, as we showed in the demo, and maybe even with some SAML. Then, because it's policy, the platform can do the mediation for you. The alternative, you have to ask your developer to program that mediation from SAML 2 and OAuth down to web service security with SAML. And most developers don't think that's a very fun job. So it's important that you have those policies and you have an API platform that can do that mediation for you, that support policies. Peter?
Am I? No questions? So how can we help you? We basically have 3 products in our stack. And if you remember the 2 boxes and the triangle, how do you turn this off, Mads?
Got it.
You'll got it. Okay, so down here we have a product called Lifecycle Manager. That's a design time tool for ensuring that you plan, that you build the right services, and that you build them in the right way. And when I say services, I could just as well have said APIs. Then we have the unified gateway. That's really the policy enforcement point. All the policies Mads mentioned will be enforced at that level. And then on top of that, we have the community manager that some of you saw demoed earlier on. So that's where you do all the community development to API app developer communication. That's really a portal on top of our gateway that configures the gateway. So those are the 3 products, and we have a stand down here. If you want to see anything demoed, please come by. And we deliver this either as something that you have in the cloud that you use, and you pay per number of users or how much throughput you have. Or you can have an on-premise solution if you prefer that. Or we can supply you with any number of hybrid solutions that you see fit. So I think that's it. This is what we think we can help you with, basically. So any questions? Nothing.